All of these talks in the School of Kindness program focus on various aspects of our society with a view to trying to shed a little light on how our world really works. There's a common thread that links all the talks, and that is that our society is run by the 1% for the 1%. The rest of us, the 99%, are expendable tools and accessories whose sole purpose in life is to serve the wishes and desires of the 1%. What these talks try to reveal is the massive deception that's routinely maintained by the 1% and their most loyal flunkies, and which keeps the 99% in a state of permanent ignorance about how we're continually tricked and lied to by the very people we trust to lead us. It is, of course, debatable as to whether or not it really is a kindness to tell people the truth when that truth is so awful it might terrify them. That is indeed a fair point. But I take the view that people should at least have the opportunity to learn the truth. If they choose not to learn it, so be it. However, I try to teach people the truth because the only way to put an end to the many things that are wrong with our society is to explain what those wrongs are. That may indeed not be a kindness to some people who have to endure those wrongs today, but it's surely a kindness, isn't it, for those who should not have to endure them tomorrow. This particular talk concentrates on the subject of justice. Justice is arguably the very backbone of any society, because any group of people who live and work together need a common understanding of how best to interact with each other. This need not be a difficult thing to do, as many so-called primitive societies have shown. Indeed, one of the most ancient and widely known principles of justice, commonly known as the Golden Rule, has been practiced in one form or another by thousands of cultures for thousands of years all around the world, and can be summarized in a mere handful of words. We should treat all living creatures as we ourselves would choose to be treated in the same circumstances. The interpretation of the Golden Rule in any particular situation should be decided by ordinary people who have been properly informed about any relevant information. Justice is that simple, or it should be. The fact that it isn't has nothing to do with the Golden Rule itself, and everything to do with that ancient curse of most societies, the 1%. Perhaps the best place to begin this talk is to try to clarify the difference between the law and justice. Ideally, there shouldn't be much difference at all. The law should be the administrative system that ensures justice is provided for all of society. But that's not what we have. We have an administration system that presides over and legitimizes massive injustice for all society. There's nothing new in this. It's always been that way. The most glaringly obvious examples of this can be seen all around the country in the so-called stately homes of the super-rich. If there's a single one of these awful monstrosities that was not built out of the proceeds of some massive crime or another, I would dearly like to know about it. From the mansions in Bristol and Liverpool that were built out of the slave trade, to the mansions that were built on the suffering of hundreds of thousands of ordinary British people during the so-called Industrial Revolution, from the mansions that were built from the piracy and plunder of the British Navy and Army, to the mansions that were built on the massive theft of countries ruled by the British Empire, from the mansions that were built on the proceeds of the biggest theft in British history, legitimised by the enclosure laws, to the mansions built from the legitimised frauds and thefts of the occupants of the City of London. Every single one of these great mausoleums to crime is the living, breathing evidence of massive injustice, living side by side with a legal system that justified it all. So we do indeed have a legal system, a huge and pompous ancient construction full of many thousands of laws, but we do not have justice, and we never have had it. Having said all that, it must be added that for all its many faults, the British judicial system has still managed to produce some important elements of real justice. However, I must quickly insert the proviso that none of these important elements of justice was ever the invention of the 1%. Mostly, they were the result of popular uprisings by the 99% against the oppression of the 1%. And the one or two fine principles that do indeed exist were not produced from a desire by the 1% to provide real justice, but to save their own skins. They were simply a couple of scrawny bones thrown to the rabble to mollify them enough to keep them from rising up and providing their own justice. One example of a truly fine feature of our legal system, and which is also the single most democratic feature of our society, is trial by jury. Given the well-known flaws of our legal system, such as the extraordinary length of time it takes, or the fact that the wealthy can purchase more so-called justice than the poor, or that if juries fail to return a particular verdict, the judge can ignore their decision and require the case to be tried again and again and again until the right verdict is arrived at. Given these many flaws of our judicial system, which is the best feature of our so-called democracy, it obviously doesn't say much for our democracy. But as I exposed that particular myth in my last talk, I won't repeat myself here. Trial by jury is one of the most important foundation stones of our judicial system, yet a very public demonstration of how juries can be and are ignored by judges occurred in December 2008, when the jury of a coroner's court inquiring into the death of Jean-Charles de Menezes was instructed by the coroner, Sir Michael Wright QC, that a verdict of unlawful killing would not be permitted. The murder of that innocent Brazilian electrician by those who are supposed to administer justice is in fact a superb proof of the massive chasm that exists between the law and justice. When a cold-blooded murder by the police is ruled by a judge to be not unlawful, and when juries may be told by judges what verdicts they may or may not return, a not uncommon event, our legal system is fully exposed for the outrageous fraud it often is. The situation is bad enough here in Britain, but is considerably worse in the United States, that supposed champion of liberty, where murders of defenceless civilians by the police, followed by exoneration of their crimes by the judicial system, is completely routine. British justice is, theoretically at least, founded on the twin virtues of presumption of innocence and trial by jury. These are two fine principles which have at their heart the noble notions that guilt must be proven, not assumed, and that right and wrong should be determined by common people, not elites. As I've tried to show, there's a huge difference between principle and practice, and our history is positively bursting at the seams with the evidence. Another important theoretical feature of our judicial system is the relative independence of judges. Although judges are paid by the state, they consider themselves independent and answerable to no one. As a body, they possibly are as impartial and honourable as any in the world, and much of the time are reasonably free of government interference in legal decisions, which reduces the possibility for political corruption of justice. But it's necessary to add the caveat that some inquiries, especially those with political implications, are not above suspicion in this regard, such as the Scott, Hutton, Butler, Butler-Schloss and Saville inquiries, for example. It's quite possible that British justice was vandalised more by the Blair government than any other political party in our recent history, and as a consequence of that, our liberties, such as they are more endangered today than they have been since ancient times. The British filmmaker Chris Atkins has made a superb documentary exposing the dire condition of British freedom. Titled Taking Liberties, it's a film which should be mandatory viewing in every school in the country and shown on TV every year at Christmas, with the Queen's speech, until such time as this appalling state of affairs is put right. However, British justice generally permits juries to do what they're supposed to do, and also, in theory at least, it requires a presumption of innocence in most cases. In other words, people charged with crimes and offences are supposed not to need to prove their innocence. It is for the prosecution to prove their guilt. But there are grotesque exceptions, such as indefinite internment without trial, as in Northern Ireland, or the scrapping of habeas corpus, that now allows routine detention without charge for an obscene 42 days, and often longer. And the law permits foreign nationals to be detained indefinitely, for the defence lawyers to be denied access to evidence against them, and for their cases to be tried in secret. Yet more hard evidence of the gulf between law and justice. Even Winston Churchill, who was no great champion of human rights, might have been appalled by these outrageous abuses, which are now routine in the so-called justice our trusted leaders provide. For it was Churchill who said, "The power of the executive to cast a man into prison without formulating any charge known to the law, and particularly to deny him the judgment of his peers, is in the highest degree odious, and the foundation of all totalitarian government." But that's exactly what we have. So if the three best aspects of our judicial system, trial by jury, presumption of innocence, and the relative independence of the judiciary, are so obviously flawed, what about some of its other features? In the next part of this talk, I'll look at some of the better-known flaws of our legal system and examine them through the prism of justice. Flaws such as the enormous cost of obtaining justice, frequently putting it well beyond the reach of people who have no hope of paying the ridiculously high fees of solicitors and barristers. Then there's the relatively new compensation culture that we've copied from the Americans. And there's the inordinate length of time taken for some cases to be resolved, often stretching across many years. There's also the practice of not paying our magistrates, and the cancer of precedent, and a cynical development which is not yet as advanced as it is in the United States, the growing trend to turn our prisons into business enterprises. And there is the glaringly obvious injustice of a system that can and does send people to prison for petty crimes such as stealing a bottle of water or a pair of trainers, whilst the same system not only fails to recognise that those who steal hundreds of millions of pounds have committed a crime, it also encourages us to worship them and shower them with honours and awards, to actually envy these terrible people and yearn to be like them.